Hello, everyone. My name is Tiff McNaughton. I'm serving with Brechin United Church in Nanaimo, BC. Generally, Brechin gathers on the traditional lands of the Sunemo people. We are grateful to be here in this beautiful place, and may we be good and gracious guests of this corner of creation and active participants in the ongoing process of reconciliation and peace. I am recording this today for you in my home, and I have set a bit of a space. I invite you to do the same if you'd like to pause the video for a moment and prepare yourself. If you've got a candle, I encourage you to light a candle. This one has been burning often throughout this Holy Week. This cloth is gray. Traditionally, the color for Good Friday might be black. And I encourage you to get your own Bible if you've got one at home, or to call up the written version of our reading from the scriptures today online. The piece is a long one, and it can be very difficult to follow along with a recording when we're not together in person, and having the words with you as your companion may be of help. I encourage you to be comfortable in whatever way that is for you as you're watching this. If you would prefer to stand or to sit, please feel free to be as you need to be right now. So wherever you are, however you are, and whenever it is that you are watching this, you are welcome. You are loved. We are drawn together as a community of faith. Please join me in a few centering breaths. Breathing in and out. Preparing our whole selves to be truly present to this sacred story. Amen. From the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verse 1 to chapter 19, verse 42. After Jesus had said all this, he left with the disciples and crossed the Jordan Valley. There was a garden there, and Jesus and the disciples entered it. Judas, the traitor, knew the place well, because Jesus often met there with his disciples. Judas led the Roman cohort to the place, along with some temple guards sent by the chief priests and the Pharisees. All were armed and carried lanterns and torches. Then Jesus, aware of everything that was going to take place, stepped forward and said to them, "Who are you looking for?" "Are you Jesus of Nazareth?" they asked. Jesus said, "I am." Now Judas, the traitor, was with them. When Jesus said, "I am," they all drew back and fell to the ground. Again, Jesus asked them, "Who are you looking for?" They replied, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said, "I have already told you that I am the one you want. If I am the one you're looking for, let the others go." This was to fulfill what he had spoken. "Of those you gave me, I have not lost a single one." Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's attendant, cutting off his right ear. The name of the attendant was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back in its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup Abba God has given me?" Then the cohort and its captain and the temple guards seized and bound Jesus. They took him first to Annas, Annas was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the temple authorities that it was better to have one person die on behalf of the people. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. This disciple, who was known to the high priest, entered his courtyard with Jesus, while Peter hung back at the gate. So the disciple known to the high priest went back and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter inside. The doorkeeper said, "Aren't you one of the guy's followers?" But Peter answered, "No, I'm not." Now the night was cold, so the attendants and guards had lit a charcoal fire and were warming themselves. Peter was with them as well, keeping warm. The high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teachings. Jesus answered, "I have spoken publicly to everyone. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple area where the whole Jewish people congregates. I have said nothing in secret. So why do you question me? Ask those who have heard me. Ask them what I said to them. They know what I said." When Jesus said this, one of the guards standing by slapped him and said, "Is this how you answer the high priest?" "If I've said nothing wrong," Jesus replied, "point it out. But if I'm right in what I said, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him, still shackled, to Caiaphas the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself. Others asked him, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" But Peter denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the attendants of the high priest, a relative of the attendant whose ear Peter had severed, spoke up. "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Again, Peter denied it. At that moment, a rooster crowed. At daybreak, they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the praetorium. The temple authorities didn't enter the praetorium, for they would have become ritually unclean and unable to eat the Passover Seder. So Pilate went out to them and asked, "What charges do you bring against this person?" They responded, "We wouldn't have brought him to you if he weren't a criminal." Pilate told them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The temple authorities replied, "We don't have the power to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said about the way he was going to die. So Pilate re-entered the praetorium and summoned Jesus. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or have others told you about me?" Pilate replied, "Am I Jewish? It is your own people and the chief priests who hand you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My realm is not of this world. If I belonged to this world, my people would have fought to keep me out of the hands of the temple authorities. No, my realm is not of this world." Pilate said, "So you're a king?" Jesus replied, "You say I'm a king. I was born and came into the world for one purpose, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who seeks the truth hears my voice." "Truth, what is truth?" asked Pilate. With that, Pilate went outside and spoke to the people. "I find no guilt in him," he said, "but according to your custom, I am always to release a prisoner at the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" They shouted, "Not him. We want Barabbas." Barabbas was a robber. So Pilate ordered that Jesus be flogged. Then the soldiers wove a crown out of thorns and put it on his head, and dressed him in a purple robe. They went up to him repeatedly and said, "All hail the King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. Pilate came outside once more and said to the crowd, "Look, I'll bring him out here to make you understand that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out, wearing the purple robe and the crown of thorns, and Pilate said, "Look upon the one you accuse." When the chief priests and the temple guards saw Jesus, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate told them, "Do it yourself. I find no reason to condemn him." "We have a law," the temple authorities replied. "The law says he ought to die because he claimed to be the only begotten of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid. He went back into the praetorium and asked Jesus, "Where do you come from?" Jesus didn't answer. Then Pilate said to Jesus, "You refuse to speak? Bear in mind that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you." "You would have no authority over me," Jesus replied, "unless it had been given to you by God. Therefore, the person who handed me over to you has the greater sin." Upon hearing this, Pilate attempted to set Jesus free. But the crowd shouted, "If you set him free, you're no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king defies Caesar." Hearing these words, Pilate took Jesus outside and seated himself on the judge's seat at the place called the Pavement, Gabbatha in Hebrew. Now it was almost noon, on preparation day for the Passover. Pilate said to the people, "Here is your king." "Take him away," they shouted. "Take him away. Crucify him." Pilate asked, "Do you want me to crucify your king?" The chief priests said, "We have no king but Caesar." Then Pilate handed Jesus over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, carrying his own cross to what is called the place of the skull, in Hebrew, Golgotha. There they crucified him along with two others, one on either side of Jesus. Pilate wrote a notice and had it put on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The notice, in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, was read by many people because the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. The chief priest said to Pilate, "Don't write King of the Jews, but this one said, 'I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate replied, "I have written what I have written." After the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his clothing and divided it into 4 pieces, one piece for each soldier. They also took the seamless robe. The soldiers said to one another, "Let's not tear it. We can throw dice to see who will get it." This happened in order to fulfill the scripture, "They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." And this is what they did. Standing close to Jesus' cross were his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary of Magdala. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Here is your son." Then he said to his disciple, "Here is your mother." From that moment, the disciple took her into his household. After this, Jesus knew that now all was completed, and to fulfill Scripture perfectly, he said, "I am thirsty." There was a jar of cheap wine sitting nearby, so they put a sponge soaked in the wine on a hyssop stick, raised it to his lips. Jesus took the wine and said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Since it was the preparation day, the temple authorities asked Pilate to let them break the legs of those crucified and take their bodies down from the crosses. They requested this to prevent the bodies remaining on the cross during the Sabbath, since that particular Sabbath was a solemn feast day. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of first one and then the other who had been crucified with Jesus. But when they came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead, so they didn't break his legs. One of the soldiers, however, pierced Jesus' side with a lance, and immediately blood and water poured out. This testimony has been given by an eyewitness, whose word is reliable. The witness knows that this testimony is the truth, so that you will believe. These things were done to fulfill the scripture. Not one of his bones will be broken. And again, another scripture says, "They will look on the one whom they have pierced." After this, Joseph of Arimathea, a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one, for fear of the temple authorities, asked Pilate for permission to remove the body of Jesus, and Pilate granted it. So Joseph came and took it away. Nicodemus came as well, the same one who had first come to Jesus by night, and he brought about 100 pounds of spices, a mixture of myrrh and aloes. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths, according to the Jewish burial custom. There was a garden in the place where Jesus had been crucified, and in the garden was a new tomb where no one had ever been buried. Since it was the day before the Sabbath and the tomb was nearby, they buried Jesus there. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. They buried Jesus there. It is our challenge as people of this whole story to stop there until Sunday morning. It is our challenge to stay present to the grief, the devastation, the crisis that the disciples, that the whole community has just experienced. In this piece that we've just read, frailty, self-absorption, and pain come out, manifest in so many different ways. We see the decimation of community as the disciples have come to know it. We have to marvel with them how this nightmare could be God's will, even though Jesus has said so many times that it is. It's hard to stay in these depths of crisis and grief. It's hard in a different way this year because we are people experiencing a new kind of crisis and grief together. Part of how we do this is by noticing the grace even in this darkest chapter. We notice that even though Jesus knew that Simon Peter would deny him 3 times, would deny being one of his disciples, he wasn't driven away. We see that Mary and a beloved disciple are connected like kin, brought together in one of Jesus's final conversations. We see Nicodemus finding a place of love, comes in and honors Jesus with myrrh and aloes and a good burial. This is enormous grace, right in the middle of crisis and grief. In this, there is God's love. In even the crisis and grief that we have now, there is God's love. And even when staying present to it is not comfortable, is not easy, is not what we'd wish for anyone, it's there. So this is where we stop. We have some scripture to share in tomorrow as well. But until Sunday morning, here we are. They buried Jesus there. Please join me in a benediction prayer. Go out into the shadows of this day and night. Keep your vigil. Important things have happened. Even more important things are about to happen. Will we be tempted to abandon everything? Will we think it was not worthwhile? Can we believe that something good can come out of something that feels so awful? The mystery continues. Amen.